So this class is going to focus on how to input a listing. But I'll be honest with you, it is not that hard to do. If you can read, and if you live in a house, you have like 90% of the information you need to be able to do this. And in fact, as we were talking at the beginning of the class, and I've forgotten your name already, who's labeled KW there. What is it?
Janice.
Janice. Okay, Janice, that's what I thought. So we were talking at the beginning about how the system even monitors how you put your listings in, at least for the required fields. So it's not that hard to do it and get it in successfully and get it right. Now, all of you should have, with the invitation, received a copy of the CVR MLS listing input form. And it was attached to your invitation at some point. Hopefully you got one. If you can't find it, you can get them from Instanet, or you can pop me an email and I'll send you a fresh one. But those are important because not only do they help you make sure you have all the information. I actually know some agents. In fact, one of my agents did it this week. They bring that form with them to the listing appointment, and they sit down and fill it out with the seller while they're taking the listing. I mean, who knows more about the house than they do? And some agents even get the seller or sellers to initial it and make it part of their file. And if you were to look at that form, you don't have to have it open today. You will notice some of the fields on it are shaded. The shaded fields on the form are the required fields. So those are the fields you definitely need to have before you start putting your listing in. And what will happen then when we put a listing in, and we're not going to go through the entire process today simply because MLS does not like it if I put a fake listing in the MLS for you. They get upset about that, but we're going to go through some of the process, and you will see that no matter what you do, there are always more fields that you have to put in. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is some fields become required when you use a particular field. And so when you put in square footage, it suddenly makes the source of square footage field required, for example, and fields like that. So we're going to take a look at that. We'll look at a lot of the fields. I'll try to point out ones that you have to make decisions on before you get started. But the second thing I want to point out is this. First of all, how many of you are fairly new real estate agents? Just wave at the screen if you don't have your video on. Mary Margaret, you don't have your video on, so I don't know if you're new or not. And by the way, if you don't want to put your video on, there's a little I can wave my hand button on your screen somewhere, and you can use that. But the point is, I've been in real estate and in MLS stuff for 35 years. Yeah, I'm old. I remember when we chiseled contracts onto stone tablets. When you delivered a contract in those days, it hit with an impact. You know what I'm saying? But the point is, this real estate market that we're in right now is wonderful for some people. It's not always going to stay this way. We've talked about it in some of my meetings here, and it almost seems like right now, if you get a listing into the MLS at any price, it just sells with multiple offers. Well, I can tell you in 35 years, I've never seen this before, not at this level. And the market will return to normal one day. And when it returns to normal, here's why this matters. 80 to 85% of all sales come out of the MLS. They are listed by one person and sold by another person, sometimes within the same often, but more often than not between two different firms. 80 to 85% or more of all contracts are what we call cooperative sales. And it is the MLS that makes that happen. So the reality is, for those of you who get to sell homes, 85% or more of your success is based simply on two things. One, that you listed it at a good price, and two, that you put it in the MLS. We like to tell everybody about all the wonderful other things that we do for them, and those are true, but they usually happen after the contract. 85% of what we do for success in getting contracts depends on pricing it right and putting it in the MLS. And that's just a simple fact. The MLS is probably one of the most powerful marketing tools in all of business, although the MLS hates it when I say that, but it's the truth. And so there will be few things you can do that are more important than pricing it right, which is a separate class called CMA, and putting it into the MLS properly. And let me give you an example of that. It happened many years ago, but I still remember it. It's the best example. How many of you have ever heard of or been to a town called Hopewell? Yeah, everybody knows where Hopewell is, right? Well, many years ago, one of our agents listed a really nice home in Hopewell, put it in the MLS. I think it was a little 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch. Back then, it was listed for $127,000, which was a great price. And they had all the information in there. And when they got to square footage, it said square footage 100. Now, she obviously made just a little tiny mistake. She left out a digit. For those of you who search in the MLS, how often do you use square footage in your searches? Fairly frequently, am I right? So, if anybody had run a search in Hopewell using square footage, would they have found her listing? No. Not only that, I noticed it and contacted her, and she was grateful after it had been in the MLS for 3 days. So, anybody know how important the first 3 days are in the life of a listing? They're some of the most important days. So what I want you to realize, and this is why this class is so important, is she made her new listing virtually unfindable across the entire MLS for most people who would have been searching in Hopewell for the first 3 days of her listing, and all she did is leave out a zero. That's all she did wrong. So that's why it's important. It's important to get your listing into the MLS as soon as possible. And I'm not an opponent of delayed showing and delayed entry, but I don't know. My feeling is, yeah, you're going to get it all set up and looking nice. But if you put it in the MLS and somebody buys it on day 2 and you and they didn't have to worry about staging, is your seller going to be happy about that? Yeah. So I'm in favor of putting it in as early as possible, just my opinion. And you have to put it in right. Understand that every missing piece of information is a missed opportunity, because you don't know what some customer out there is going to be looking for. And you don't know how good other agents are at searching the MLS. Some are very, very good at it. Some only learn the basics. You've seen listings in the MLS where you know all the agent did is put in as little information as possible to get past putting it into the MLS, and they took up 3 pictures with their cell phone. That's a disservice to sellers. So the point of this class is we're going to go over how to input a listing. We're going to go over some of the things that are important in a listing. And we're going to talk a little bit about maintaining the listing once it's in the MLS, because this is not an issue right now because they sell within days of hitting the MLS. But when it returns to normal, I want to suggest, for example, that your listing in the MLS in June should not show snow on the roof. Just a passing thought. And there are little things like that that you can do in a normal real estate market that make your listing a little bit more marketable in the most important tool that you have at your disposal. So, any thoughts about that? Any questions about that? Does that make sense to everybody? I see nods. Nods are good. Don't see any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's get this set up here. And this should be the screen that I want. And I'll have to reset my my main screen. But right now you should see my mouse waving wildly on your screen. Somebody nod whether you see that or not. Good. I had one class that I did and nobody said anything. And my computer didn't display it the way it's supposed to, and I never know how they figured out that class. So now I make sure. So I got that, and I need to add one more thing to my screen. I can see who's here, and there we are. And one last step here. You take my camera and take attendance. I love doing this on Zoom because I can take attendance with a picture. All righty, so here we go. We're going to talk about adding a listing. I'm just going to walk through the process. I've given you the reason why I like teaching this class and why I think it's important. So here we are in the MLS, and everything in the MLS, for those of you you're getting started, is under one of these tabs across the entire top here. And so everything you can do in the MLS is located under one of these things. We're going to go here to input. And let's see. There we go. It's coming. The internet's been slow lately, not just here, but across the whole internet in our area. So this is the input screen. This is where you go not only to put a listing in, but to modify your listing as well. You know, change prices, change statuses, update pictures, schedule open houses, all of that sort of thing. And agent roster here, you can all see this. It doesn't do anything except two things, just so that you know. This is where you can go and click on edit existing agent. You can't do anything with add new. You're not allowed to add people to the MLS, and I don't even know why that link is there. But if you go to edit listing, it lets you do two things. You can add your agent picture to the MLS. If you add your agent picture to the MLS, it'll appear on the cover of your CMA. And if you're doing auto email, which is a whole nother class that I do, you can have your picture appear on the portal when it shows up on your customer's PC. You can either add a new listing here or edit an existing listing. I'm going to just touch on edit real quick to show you what you can do here. I'll click on this. Whoops, that's not the screen I was looking for. But I can search for my own listings here. Or if I go to my matrix, and understand the reason my screen might look a little different than yours is while I'm licensed and I'm a member of MLS, I don't actually list or sell properties. So if I go here to my listings, you can see that I don't have any, but they would be listed here and I could edit them. I'm going to switch briefly, become someone else. I'm going to become Blakely here. So these are all of Blakely's listings. And if I check one off, click on edit, I have access to everybody's listings here. This is what the modify screen normally looks like. And I can go to the input form and make changes. And you will want to do that as you maintain your listings. Make sure the information is current. And I actually suggest going in every month and updating the remarks a little bit, just so that it doesn't always look exactly the same. You have to schedule open houses here. This is where you schedule your open houses. You don't put them into the remarks in the listing. That is a violation. You go here and you schedule them, and they distribute them to the agents. You can change it to pending or sold or temporarily withdrawn with one click. Write this down for those of you who are new. 3, 5, 7. 3 days from the last seller's signature to get the listing into the MLS. 3 days to update any significant changes, especially ones that are either required or signed off on by the seller, like a price change. 5 days to make it pending once you have a contract. 7 days to make it sold once it closes. And those dates, the 3 days, do not include the day the listing agreement was signed. So if it gets signed today, technically you have tomorrow, the day after, and the day after that to get it into the MLS, and it's calendar days, not business days. All right. And while we're at it, how many of you know you can put a coming soon listing into the MLS? All right. How many of you know you can put a delayed entry or a delayed showing listing into the MLS? Let's talk about those as well.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
I just want to jump in real quick. I just remind everybody in our office that if you want to advertise your listing, you have to have it in, you have 1 day to have it in the MLS. If you want to advertise on any kind of social media or anything.
That's right. I was going to mention that. So if you make a listing coming soon, you can have it coming soon for up to 21 days. The difference between coming soon and delayed entry is that under coming soon, it does not accumulate days on market. But remember that the listing date is always the date next to the last seller's signature. So if you sign a listing today and it's delayed entry for a week, when you put it in the MLS, it's going to show 7 days on market because you have to put in the date it was signed. It was delayed entry. And it can take you 3 days to get your listing into the MLS once it's signed, right? I mentioned that earlier. Unless you market it in any way. So, Amy, you take Melissa's house for a listing, and you're at her house and you sign the listing, she signs it, it's all listed, and you walk out to the car, drive to the office, get it set up, but you don't tell anybody you took the listing, you got 3 days to get it into the MLS before you get fined. On the other hand, Amy, if you walk out of Melissa's front door and stick a sign in the front yard on your way out, you just advertised it. You now have 1 day to get it into the MLS. Does that make sense? And I mean sense from a practical, what I have to do standpoint. So that's the basic rules for statuses. There's more details than that. And Janice obviously knows this stuff. So you can ask her questions. You can ask me questions. But that's the status management part of this. Any questions about that? All righty then. This is where you go to manage photos. How many pictures can you put into your listing in the MLS? I'll give you a hint, 50. And how long do you have to get your first picture in the MLS? I'll give you a hint, 3 days. So make sure you get them in and you get them in on time. I'll try to briefly show you how to add pictures. Same thing with supplements. This is where you can add other documents that are important to your listing most importantly, anything I need to assemble an offer on your listing. All right. If it's a listing where some sort of documentation is required from a lawyer or a seller or a bank or even your own self, please make sure that's in there. I don't want to have to contact you and ask you for these things. And then there's a few other things that you can do here, but that's the status and update portion of this. Any questions about that? Very cool. All right, and I'm going to go back to input. Click on add new, and we're going to walk through the process. And you have all the statuses here. Since I'm going to get the question anyway, sold non-MLS status is primarily for listings where there was no listing agreement, where there was no listing agent. For example, you talked to a FSBO, you had a buyer, you sold the house, but you weren't the listing agent, you were the selling agent. That's primarily what sold non-MLS is for, okay? You won't do that very often, but I always get asked the question. So we're gonna make believe putting in a single family listing. So we'll click here and it opens up to start the process. You have three choices. Start new listing from tax record, which is, by the way, required. Copy from an existing listing, and that would only be if it was previously in the MLS. And start a new listing, which lets you do it manually because you do not have access to the tax record for some reason. We don't use that anymore because now we have access to the tax records for pretty much the entire state of Virginia. So I'm gonna fake list my house. So we're already on the first one. First time I came here, I clicked this 10 times and nothing happened. And I suddenly realized it's because I was already on it. I'm not as smart as everybody thinks I am, you know? Yes, Janice.
So I have a question. I had a listing that I put in and I couldn't use Realist because Realist had not been updated and it had the wrong person as the owner. Is that when you, is that it? Because I ended up having
No, you know what I would do? I would still pull it from the tax record because I want all the other information to come over, and then I would just edit that field. Because you bring it over from the tax record, you can edit still any of the fields.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Yeah, I ended up printing the tax record and doing it the hard way.
Yeah.
So now I know better.
So this was worth the whole class to you now, right?
There's always at least one thing that saves me time.
Yep. So I'm going to scroll down here to Hanover. That's where I live. Well, oops, I went past the H's. The alphabet's become a challenge for me lately. I don't know what it is. And you don't have to fill in all of these. You just have to fill in what you need. So I'll put in 8250 and Spice Wood. Never put in the drive, road, court, street, laneway, circle, avenue, bypass, or boulevard. Click on search, and there it is. That's my house. Click on fill, and there we go. All righty. And now, basically, the class is over because all you do is click on each of these tabs, put in whatever information you have, make sure you get all of the required fields in, decide what status you want it to be in. We're going to leave it incomplete today. If I remember correctly, like incomplete listing remains in here for up to 30 days, and then it's automatically removed. So if you decide to practice this, understand my next word to protect myself, don't. But if you ignore what I just said, please make sure you leave it on incomplete and don't change it. Because MLS frowns severely on fake listings going into the MLS, okay? Number two, Incomplete is a wonderful way to get a head start on putting your listings in. And a lot of people will do it. You're still working on getting it. You're still gathering information, but you want to get a head start. That's fine. But make sure you recheck the important fields. The biggest mistake people make who actually use incomplete to get started on their listing is it wants a listing date and you don't have one yet. And so 2 weeks goes by, you get the listing, you finish filling it out, and you forget to put in the correct listing date. That's a finable offense. They probably won't fine you the first time you do it, but you'd have to contact them and get it fixed. Their system will pick it up. So if you do use incomplete for real to get started, make sure you remember to go back and put in the correct listing date and the correct expiration date. And who remembers what is the correct listing date? Somebody tell me. Unmute if you don't mind.
The date the contract was ratified.
And what date is that?
The date is signed.
By?
All parties.
Nope. Good guess though. By the last seller to sign it. It doesn't matter, for example, when you signed it. It only matters when the last seller signed it. Otherwise, we could just not sign the listing agreement and put it off as long as we wanted, right? Now, it's the last seller's signature that decides the listing date. Okay? So we're going to leave it on incomplete. From this point on, you just go across the top and click on each of these and put in information. We'll start with listing info. And it's already here. Type will be detached. And the reason I like to point that out is if you ever want to have fun making fun of your fellow realtors, run a search in MLS in single family and search on attached. You'll get about 30 of them. 27 of them will have an attached garage. That is not what this field is referring to. It's referring to single family homes that are attached to each other like you have in downtown Richmond and stuff. It's not a condo. It's a single family house, but there's no property in between them. Most of the agents who use that field forget what it means. We're doing detached because my house is detached. And remember what I said about the input form. You want to at least have that in front of you because the shaded fields show you the required fields. Hanover, delayed showing. If I say yes to this, then I have to put the date in here when it can start being shown. Nobody can show it until that date, not even you. Okay? If you suddenly have a showing and your seller wants it shown, you have to go in here and change that to being shown right now, fully active. And I recommend that you keep a list of everybody who contacted you about that property and let them know that the delayed showing has been removed. That's just common professional courtesy. List price. Well, since this is my house, I'm going to list it for $1 million. This is the only time I get to type that number. List date, click on the calendar. We'll make it today because we just signed it. And area required. I'm in area 44. We're not doing a delayed showing, and we'll make this expire on September 2nd because that's my birthday. All righty. Expected on market date, that's for coming soon. And right of first refusal, that's if you have a contract already where someone has a house to sell. In order to buy it, you leave it active. That date goes in here so that people can know there is a contract on it with a sale of home contingency, a right of first refusal. And so you just go through and put in all the information. You want to make sure it maps. Mapping is not only required, but it's one of the most important things when your listing goes out across the internet. And I want you to have that in your mind. The major out there in the world marketing tool for us is the internet. You want to ask yourself, if you were shopping for a home, what's the first thing you want to see, or one of the first things you want to see? I want to see where it is. So don't ignore this. I'm going to click on Get Latitude and Longitude from Address. And it automatically mapped it for me. If it's incorrect, I can click here on latitude manually and adjust it. And I can also choose the Google Street View if I prefer it. I like this one. And so we walk through it. Got the address. You want to pick your post office. This is essential because not only is it required, did you know that Mechanicsville is not a place in Virginia? And I can't spell this morning. There it is. It is not a place. It's a zip code. There is no town of Mechanicsville. And there are a few others that are like that. And so the address of this property, if I don't put that in, would show up as Spicewood Court, Hanover, because that's the actual designation. If you look at our county cities list in MLS, Mechanicsville does not appear on the list because Mechanicsville is not an incorporated city. So make sure you pick the correct post office, and that will help people to identify it. State, this is a resale. And so you just go through and pick what it is. Subdivision, I live in Hanover Grove. There it is. And neighborhood is for homes that are in a recognizable neighborhood that everybody knows, but is not a subdivision. You could put the subdivision name in there if you think people might search by neighborhood. But for example, the Fan goes in there. Brander Mill goes in there. And things like that. Your built description is actual. It came over from the tax record. Finished square feet came from the tax record. And the rule is, if it's not from the tax record, you have to put in the finished square foot source. And here's my suggestion. Always be the source of the source, never be the source. So always use square footage in the tax record for liability reasons. If you get it from someone else, make sure you check who is responsible for that information. And in my opinion, it should never be you. And so you walk through this, picking all of the information. Laurel Meadow, high school is Mechanicsville, middle school is Bell Creek. Directions are required even though nobody uses them anymore. We all use the GPS. But you type in the directions, it's a required field. That's basically how information goes in across the board. Any questions about any of this stuff?
Are you able to add fields?
No. As a matter of fact, the fields are completely proscribed by the MLS. It does not have the ability to add custom fields. It would make the database very unstable because people would make up bizarre things, or they would put information in the field, in a fake field, just because they couldn't remember which was the right field. So no, you can't add fields. And by the way, that is the reason too why, if you do this mistake, and you will do it in your career at some point, if you put a listing into the wrong property category, it cannot be moved over. So for example, where that commonly happens is Janice there lists her first condo. Never listed a condo before, but she's put in hundreds of single family listings. So without thinking, she goes in and puts it in single family when it was supposed to be in condo. It cannot be moved over. If you do that, what you have to do is contact the MLS first. Tell them you made a mistake and have them delete the listing that's in the wrong category. After it is deleted, then you have to go back in and re-enter it in the correct category. Otherwise, you'll have a duplicate listing and you'll get a fine notice for that. Although you won't get fined, but you'll get a notice for that. The other thing I'll mention, because you can only have a property in one place in the MLS, there is one exception to that. You can have a property in single family and you can have it in rental. If you've listed a property that can either be purchased or rented, you are allowed to put it in both categories, but that's the only current exception. Good questions, by the way, making me think of stuff. So from this point on, you simply
Can I ask a question?
Yes, said that. Oh, Mary
Mary
Margaret Brown.
Yes, here I am. I have a question on the square footage, the finished square feet.
Yes.
There's
I knew you were
two.
going to do that to me. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I am, because there's like 4 boxes here. So there's finished square feet, and then there's finished square feet dash basement, and then unfinished square feet basement. So the finished square feet dash basement, is that if the basement had finished square feet, does that include the rest of the house or only the basement itself?
Oh, it's one of my favorite questions. The answer is it depends.
Okay.
It depends on what you want to do. I'll tell you right now, if we got 100 agents and brokers and appraisers together in a room today and asked them this question, we could go stand in the corner and wait till the battle ended and pick up the bodies.
Oh boy.
Because the rule is in real estate, and it's an unspoken rule for marketing properties, but it's a spoken rule for appraisers, okay? Underline that. Is that finished square feet is above grade. So basement finished square feet is not considered part of the total square feet, and that's how appraisers are required to treat it. On the other hand, I once chaired an appraisal committee, and here's what the appraiser said. The appraiser said, I have to treat basement square footage separately from the full square footage of the house. But if I list my house with you, you better treat it like it's all square footage, because that's going to affect the marketing. So different agencies will have different policies on this. You're always safer doing the accurate thing, but it's actually a question when it comes up for you to ask your sales manager what you should do. Okay, does that answer the question as best as I can for you without getting myself in trouble?
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I've seen it. I think I've seen it both ways.
Yeah.
So thank you for answering that.
And by the way, along the same line, unfinished square feet, in this case would be above grade. Usually the thing that causes that is it's not directly heated. If you have a cape and it's heated by the heat drifting up the stairs, but there's no actual heat vents up there, that may still be considered unfinished square foot. So there's as complete an answer as I can give you, okay? Any other questions on this page? I'm going to go a little faster from this point on. Room information, room dimensions. Not everybody does them, but everybody should. And it's easy to do. If you don't have the dimensions, get yourself one of these little laser measuring things, or as Tom Hopkins used to say, bring a measuring tape and get your seller to hold the other end of the tape. It gets them involved in the listing process. But it's very easy to do. You select room type, and I'll select living room, room length, and we'll make it 15 by 13. I'm just making this up. You can do decimal if you want to. Oops, I put that in the wrong place. You can do decimals if you want to. That's up to you. Room level, usually necessary. Room description, whatever. Then you click on more and you keep adding additional rooms. Get off of here, Florida room, put in the rest of the information more, and keep going and keep going. This is information people like to have, especially the description. This is where you get to point out specific features in that room, and people really do look at that. So any questions about room info?
John,
right.
do you advise the realtor doing the measurements, or would you say you have to get that from a different source as well?
There aren't many other sources for that.
Okay.
So yeah, I advise that you actually do it, and just be careful doing it. And I don't use the decimal for that reason. I round. If it's above 0.5, I round up. If it's below 0.5, I round down. Then it's at least approximate. You know what I'm saying? But that's just my opinion.
John, how
My
do you,
opinion plus $1.25 will buy you a cup of Wawa coffee. So
how do you handle rooms with like, I guess if I were doing the width of a room, do you do the widest part, or if it's bump outs and all that, do you do the narrowest part, or is that why you're saying it's just an approximate?
well, it depends on the room. For example, if there's a bay window, I don't measure inside the bay window. I would do the wall next to the bay window. But if it's a bow window, which, and I always forget, one of them covers the whole wall, one of them is just part of it, then I might measure it inside. But you can put that in the description. You can say measurements include the bay or bow window, or room is not a square room, or something along those lines, You're not going to run into it very often, and people aren't going to notice these differences very often. Bath info, the thing you want to know here is you need to fill out every one of these. So on level 1 in my house, I have a half bath. So I'm going to put 1 over here. In level 2, I have 2 full baths, and they both are tub and shower. In all of the other ones, you want to put a 0 and just do it, and you will have filled the screen. That's pretty obvious, right? Everybody got that? Features, all check boxes. You simply check off the ones that you want to use. This is where your input sheet comes in handy, because for many of these, if not all of them, you'll see a number on it. The number tells you how many things you can pick off that list. So I have a 2-story colonial, and my house is also commonly known as a salt box. Just pick all 3. And so you just go through all of these and fill them out. Believe it or not, golf frontage is required. It happened when we went to the co-op. I don't know why it's required, because I don't even know anybody who lives on a golf course, but it's required. I don't live on a golf course. If I had said yes, though, this field would have become required. So that's why you will never get a listing in on the first try. I did once. I thought I must have done something wrong, because you can't possibly memorize all the fields that when you pick one thing, it now needs another piece of information. I do not have a garage. If I did, though, I would have to tell it how many. I do not have a basement. I have a crawl space. And so you just keep filling out all of the information, and as many as you can. I'm going to point out one other handy tip here. Where is interior? If I remember correctly, you can pick up to 15 things on this list. but you probably will often have more than 15 that you could pick. So which ones should you use? I want you to ask yourself this question. Which ones are people most likely to use in a search? So for example, if you have a first floor primary bedroom, I'm going to click this one because somebody might search by it. I'm going to click this one because it is a first floor bedroom. And in all odds, I'm going to click this one because it has a full bath. That's probably what made it the primary bedroom. And the reason I'm picking all three is I want Janice to find my listing no matter which one of those three she uses, as long as it's true of the house. On the other hand, every house I know has cable TV. Pretty much. So if you work in an area where everything has cable TV, you don't have to bother to check that one. You can pick another one that might be more useful when people are doing searches. The reason this is important is what is the reason you put your listing in the MLS? And I know your goal is to sell it. We talked about that. The reason you put it in the MLS, the principle you put it in the MLS is that it shows up on as many searches as possible. So when you look at these lists, the first choices you make on these lists are the ones that people might use when they run searches. And then if you have any left of the 15, then you go in and fill in the ones that you think might interest people the most. But that's a mentality you want to have in this whole process. Put your listing in so it shows up on as many searches as possible, as long as what you put in is true, okay? So for example, if you have a listing that's in area 34, but you know area 22 is more desirable, you're not allowed to put it in as area 22. And I know none of your agents do that, but there are people out there who do that. So it has to be true, but you want it to show up on as many searches as possible. And for the rest of this, it's just picking the right choice off the list. Any questions about that? All right, then. General info is also self-explanatory. Waterfront, yes or no, is not required, but certainly if it has waterfront, say yes to it. A lot of people sometimes forget that. I'll pick no. And the assessments came over automatically. There is a total assessment field in the listing, but you don't fill it in. It calculates using these two fields. And the rest of this is pretty straightforward. You want to fill in whatever it has. Disclosures are required. I'm going to say listing attachment and lead disclosure, listing attachment. No form because my house is not before 78, but because I'm a really good real estate agent, I listened to my class and I put every document in the supplements when I put this listing in. So you'll be able to get all the disclosures there. Any questions about this page? We'll keep going. Remarks. Remarks, you just type them in. The two things you want to know is you have, I believe, 1,200 characters. A lot of people have been in the business a while. They use a lot of abbreviations because we used to not have that much space. Don't use abbreviations. Write it out and think of this as where you're putting information that doesn't readily appear somewhere else in the listing. Think of it as a kind of an ad, but make it descriptive of the house. Don't put in things. My favorite is, what a dollhouse, which we all know means only two people can stand in the kitchen together at the same time. You know what I'm saying? So put in useful, good descriptive information. Try not to use abbreviations. Try to use good grammar. And no information goes in remarks except about the house. You are not allowed to end this with a statement that says, do not talk to the agent who sent you this listing. Leave now and call me at my number. You're not allowed to use this to steal other people's customers. So no company information, no agent information, no call me information, no we have other models information, because that could direct people to you who belong to other agents. That information all goes in agent only comments. Any questions about that? And the last thing I'll mention is, I don't know if you have a policy. Our policy is to always say yes to this paragraph. It allows the MLS to have permission to protect your listing information as it goes out across the internet. So in our opinion, it's a good thing. We always say yes to it. Fee info is fee info for the HOA. You say yes, you put in information here that you have on it. This is pretty straightforward. I've never gotten any questions on this. Do you have any? All right, so it goes faster from this point on, doesn't it? Owner information is already here. It is required. You list a famous person's house or a rich person's house, and they say they don't want their name in here. They want you to just say occupant or something. You can't do that. Put in the owner's name that appears in the tax record. And if it's a corporation, you're fine. But you have to put them in there no matter what your seller says. It is required, and I can look it up in the tax records anyway, so it's no big deal. And the rest of this is pretty straightforward. Owner agent, if the owner is a real estate agent, it has to be disclosed. If you are related to the seller in some way, that has to be disclosed. How far removed is a gray area. I would just say, if you're related to them, say yes to that. And the rest of this is also pretty straightforward. Any questions? All right, and your information would appear under agent office info. Wake up MLS. There we go. And since it knew who Blakely was, since I'm faking Blakely listing my house, it's already here. Listing, limited representation, we don't do that. That's where people do the smorgasbord of services people can purchase. This also should be pretty straightforward. The only thing I'll tell you is you cannot change the listing agent. You can only put your own in. Only your broker or your office administrator can move a listing to another agent. Compensation information. Selling firm compensation percent, selling firm compensation amount. This is how much we're sharing. Dual variable, for the most part, if you don't know what that means, you don't do it. But it involves situations where there are different commission amounts or splits under different circumstances. Structured compensation remarks. Again, if you don't know what this is, you probably don't do it. It does appear in new construction to some degree. For example, where you get a certain percentage on the base price and maybe a different percentage or no percentage on the upgrades or additional improvements. Compensation remarks, whatever you need to put in here. Here's the rule. The rule with compensation is, if I go in here and it's your listing, I am supposed to know what my compensation will be if my contract is accepted. It cannot be conditional. Conditional compensation is not allowed. So basically, I need to be able to go in your listing, look at the information you put in here, and calculate what my commission is going to be if my contract is accepted. And I know that can become complicated in some areas or some gray areas, that's when you talk to your sales manager, or that's when you call MLS to find out where you have crossed that line or not crossed that line. But compensation cannot be conditional, and I need to be able to know what I'm going to get paid if I sell your listing for you. Any questions about that? All right, we're almost done. Showing instructions. That's what it says. Central lock, in the central lock serial number. And I suggest that you take a picture of the central lock box before you finish putting it on the doorknob. Then you'll have the serial number with you when you get back to the office. This is required if you say lockbox. You have to do this and you have to do this. And if you put a lockbox on, it must be a central lock lockbox. If it's within CVR MLS's jurisdiction, you can have a second lockbox on if it's a combo or another brand, but you have to put a central lock lockbox on if you say any of these. Okay? Any questions about showing instructions? All right, virtual tour info, very straightforward. If you have a virtual tour, it has to be hosted somewhere. So it has a URL and you put the URL in there. So if you use a company who produces your virtual tour, when you get the link, you copy and paste it into one of these boxes. If you do your own tour, you can walk through the house with your camera on your phone and put it on your YouTube channel and put the link in here. And when they click on it, they will take your tour having you talk about the house. But let's talk about that regulation. Your pictures and your virtual tours must be unbranded. Your pictures can only be about the house. You cannot be in them. Your tours, if you do your own on a YouTube channel, you cannot introduce yourself. In fact, you cannot even show yourself in the video. You can just walk through the house giving a tour without any firm or agent or people's self-identification. That's virtual tours. Any questions? All righty then. Last thing is internet display info. And I'm going to go over this with you very briefly, or rather very quickly, because it's not entirely clear to a lot of people. These are based on the internet display choices that are in the listing agreement. There are 4 of them. 2 of them you initial if they say yes or no to. 2 of them you only initial if they say yes, which isn't too confusing, right? Ultimately, you probably want your seller to say yes to all of them, and here's why. Internet display, yes or no, that's a no-brainer. Everybody says yes. They know that that's the #1 way we advertise properties today anyway. Address display, most people say yes because they know once the listing appears on the internet, give any 9-year-old 8 seconds, they'll figure out what the address is. Everything's geocoded on the internet anyway. These are the 2 that people sometimes say no to. No to comments and reviews. Well, if they say no to comments and reviews, what is the #1 website in the universe for comments and reviews? Anybody know? I do. It's called Facebook. In fact, all social media are a billion blogs that invite comments and reviews. So if your customer says no to this, you have to tell them, then I can't do any social media marketing for you. So you want them to say yes to that. And the last one is probably the most common one to say no. I know because I'll get calls from agents who say my listing didn't go on to Zillow. And I'll look and they said no to this. Here's what happens. Your seller wants you to say no to that because they do want their listing to go to Zillow, but they want the Zestimate to go away. Well, that's not a thing. The Zestimate is always there. So what you do is you tell them to say yes to this. Zillow is too important of a website to not have your listing appear on it as a listing. And if anybody questions the Zestimate, I'll handle it for you. That's why you hired me to be your real estate agent. And then you smile. And that little sparkle thing comes off your tooth. You know what I'm saying? So that's internet display info. You have to do what your seller says, but you want to talk to them about why they should say yes to all four, because it really is to their benefit. So then when you're all done, you've filled out all of them, and I'm going to go back to status just to make sure it's still on incomplete. Now I'll submit listing. And look at that. Look how good I did. Wow. I only missed one piece of information for incomplete. I can't show you the next step because I cannot click on coming soon or active, because MLS will send someone out here to beat me to a pulp under my desk. If I had clicked active and clicked on submit, it would have given me red flags on almost all of these because we didn't put in all the information. But if I go here to room info, you'll see I didn't put in a room level here. Once I started adding it, it became required. So I have to add the room level, click on submit listing, and now it is in as an incomplete listing. And it gave me an MLS number. This is its permanent MLS number. And you want to write that down. I suggest if you're going to use the input form, like I always recommend, write that right across the top of your input form and keep it in your folder. And if I click here, I can begin to see what my listing looks like. And if I want to go back and play with it, there's lots of ways to get to it, but I like to copy the MLS number, go back to input, put it in here, paste it, and click on edit. And now I'm back in. Here's my input form. There's all the tabs. And I can go back and fill in the rest of the information. And when it's time for it to go active or coming soon, select that here and click on submit listing. Now, remember what I said, if you're using incomplete, don't forget to go back here to listing info and make sure the listing date is correct. That's the number one mistake people who use incomplete to get a head start do in order to save themselves some work. And they wind up having to contact the MLS and get it fixed. It's a pain in the neck. So I'll go back to cancel. I can do all of these things here. I can even now delete this incomplete listing, which I'll do before we're done because it is fake. That's new. You didn't used to be able to do that. Or I can leave it there and it'll go away in 30 days. Add photos. Click here to manage photos. And I can browse to them. It's really hard to do, so pay close attention. I'm going to go to where I have listing photos and I'll just arbitrarily pick a listing. I'm going to highlight all of them. I can do it easily enough by highlighting all of them and selecting all of them, or I can hold my control key down and pick them one at a time, then click on open. And sorry it was so complicated to do. That's just the easiest they could make it. So it's very easy to do, actually. And if you upload 50 photos this way, make sure you have a cup of coffee. It's going to take a few minutes for them to go in. And then I can rearrange them. So here's the front picture. I'm just going to drag that over and put it there. And let's see, what else do I have here? I like this picture next. And I like the rear picture last. Rearrange them in the order you want. And who would like to do something that a lot of people don't do that I think is important and will give you an advantage? Anybody want an advantage? Please put in some room descriptions here. I mean, it's such a good opportunity to get more detailed information out there, especially pointing out some things that will make people notice things they might not otherwise notice. Number two, and this is a biggie. This is a particular point for me personally. You take the pictures of the house and you're upstairs and the room is pink. It's a nice kid's bedroom, and on the wall it says Melissa's room. Please don't take a picture of that and put it in the MLS. These pictures go out all over the internet, and you have just told everyone across the internet that a little girl named Melissa lives in this house. And it's shown some of the things that are unique to her room. I hate to say it, but the internet is a dangerous place. You don't want that information going out. So please look at your pictures before you put them across the entire internet. Make sure you're not disclosing things like that, or disclosing an inventory of your client's valuable things that are in the house. Those are good things to look at. Feel free to rearrange the furniture and move it back to get better pictures. And make sure you get as much light into the room as you possibly can. So those are some picture tips. Once they're in, click certify and save. Now, when you put your pictures in, they can often take, notice no picture appears here, they can take as much as a half an hour to show up in your listing. If you change pictures, which I recommend, like I said, in July, your listing should no longer have snow on the roof. So you go take a new picture and you add it. It can take 15 to 30 minutes to actually show up in the MLS, so don't panic. Same thing with uploading your supplements. And you can assign your central lockbox to your listing here, so it'll track your showings for you. I can't show you how that works because I don't even have a central lockbox key. Since I don't show listings, I didn't bother to pay for the fee. But those are the main additional things that you want to do in finishing putting your listing into the MLS. Those are the reasons you want to do it. And those are some of the things that you want to watch out for. So that's it for what I have for you, unless you have some questions. Anybody have questions? Did that give you what you needed to be able to do a good job with this important task? The other thing I'll recommend then, one last thing. You can go in and play a little bit like we did, as long as you keep it incomplete. And then, like I said, delete it afterward. And I'm going to go ahead and do that now so I don't forget. But a better thing to do, if you don't have a listing to put in the MLS, find someone who has got a listing to put in an MLS and sit with them, look over their shoulder, or even ask if they'll look over your shoulder and let you drive. Because two things will happen. First of all, you will get a good feel for how to put a listing in. I can get a listing in now in about 20 minutes, start to finish, because I've done so many. But secondly, you will suddenly find out that the searches you run in MLS are 10 times better than they were before. Because once you put a listing in, you get a feel for all the different fields that are in here and what information goes in them. And you'll suddenly find you know how to find things using those search fields because you know what belongs in those places. Does that make sense? All right, then. We are finished. Yes,
John,
Jen.
hey, I missed part of it. Sorry, I was on the call, but did you show everybody where they can get the sheet so they can take it with them
I just
on?
mentioned where you get them. You can get them on Instanet. That's the best place to get them, the input forms. You can print one out, or you can just email me and I'll be happy to send you one. Okay, I'm going to turn off the recording